All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Greg Lemon. I am the head of the Communication and Education Division here at Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. And thank you for joining us today to talk over some of the things that we're thinking about as we're heading into the summer as in terms of our fisheries around the state. So I'm going to do some quick introductions and then turn it over to our fish chief, Adam Strainer. So on the call here today, you've got me and Adam, Pat Saffel from Region 2. Wave, Pat. There you go. We've got Jason Mullen in Region 4, Central Montana. Give us a wave. There you are. Mike Duncan in Southwest Montana in Region 3. Thanks, Mike. And then Justin is going to be helping us make sure we don't screw this up from an IT standpoint. And then Garrett Turner with the director's office, there he is. So thanks again for joining us today. We're going to go through a bit of a presentation here, and then we'll be taking questions. So and I'll be handling that portion of the program and take it away, Adam.
Well, thanks, Greg. Pleasure to be here. Again, Adam Strainer, the fish chief for the fisheries division here at FWP, and I'm glad to be here. So basically, what we wanted to do was take this opportunity to talk a little bit about a handful of top concerns related to rivers, especially as we approach drought season. We're kind of getting into the thick of it. So with that, everything FWP does touches our agency's mission to steward the fish, wildlife, and parks and our outdoor recreational resources for the public now and into the future. And so through that lens, we're here today to discuss an important, timely subject, and that's monitoring drought conditions across Montana and how those conditions impact both our fisheries and anglers. It's getting to be the peak angling season. So our decisions impact anglers as they game out their fishing plans for the summer and fall months. So we think it's very important for everyone to understand how and why we may close a river to fishing during hot periods of the day, or ask an irrigator, for example, to help us maintain flows in important drainages across the state. Many Montanans and those visiting our state have become accustomed to FWP's approach to managing drought conditions that impact stream flows and fish populations. And just this week, on an internal call with FWP's drought work group, staff began considering implementation of some of the standard tools we have at our disposal. So really, the timing of this discussion is perfect for those new and old to learn about our strategies and tools for approaching drought season. So the first thing I'd like to do is discuss our strategy and acknowledge the amazing FWP team that meets weekly from about April to October. We call them the Drought Work Group. This group is led by Fisheries Division staff at headquarters and includes fish managers from all 7 regions across the state, our amazing water unit staff from across the state, as well as Greg and the likes of Greg and Garrett's group, the communications group. As we all collectively come together, we provide updates and forecasts for stream flows and weather to game plan in accordance with our angling restriction and fishing closure criteria, applying standard tools like hoot owl restrictions, water body closures, or when to make FWP calls on our water rights to protect fish populations or maintain or enhance stream flows. And most importantly, they also plan out how to best communicate things like restrictions or closures to anglers in the most responsive manner possible, like through press releases at our website. I'd like to briefly talk about the tools before I pass the mic to our 3 fish managers to discuss some of our rivers of top concern related to drought in Montana. So first, generally, we consider placing restrictions or closures on a river or stream if water temperatures exceed 73 degrees Fahrenheit for 3 consecutive days. Now, that said, there are exceptions to this strategy, things like Waters that have native species like cut trout or bull trout, that temperature threshold moves down to 68 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's when a restriction or closure would go into place. Another consideration we might make is things like uh, extreme angling pressure on the likes of places like the Missouri or the Bighorn rivers. If we're getting close to thresholds and there's a pile of fishing pressure, we can implement restrictions or closures in that vein. The next strategy, our next hoot owl restrictions are probably the most common tool you'll see once thresholds are met. Hoot owl restrictions still allow angling. That's really important because a lot of folks sometimes view any restriction or closure as purely a closure. But hoot owl restrictions still allow angling, but only until 2 p.m. This tool provides protection to fish populations by removing angling-related stress to fish during the warmest time of the day. Closures are typically tied to, now I'll move into closures. Closures are typically tied to water body specific drought management plans, like the Big Hole Watershed Drought Management Plan, and are based on flow criteria. So when flows reach X cubic feet per second, the water body is closed to angling. Or a closure can go into place when conditions become near extreme or extreme. And the last thing, kind of one of our core pillars I wanted to touch on in relation to drought management is FWP owns a number of water rights across Montana aimed at maintaining in-stream flow at levels necessary to maintain healthy fisheries. In some cases, FWP may make call or ask for water to return to the stream when flows reach these critical thresholds. So collectively, these tools position FWP, our partners, and anglers, in a good place to ensure we continue to meet the critical pillar of our mission to steward the fish, wildlife, and parks, and outdoor recreation and resources for the public now and into the future. With that, I would like to now pass that on to the Missoula Area Fisheries Manager in FWP Region 2, Pat Saffel, to talk about a river of top concern in his area and how he and his staff stay on top of all the drought concerns likely to impact water bodies in his area. Pat?
Thanks, Adam. At this time of year, we're really focused on water flows. Of course, water is important to fish, and it's also reflecting snowmelt and snowpack conditions. And while water temperatures will become more of an issue in the future, we're really concentrating on that. What's the river flows right now, and that's kind of the template for kind of giving us a prognosis for what the summer might bring. And if I start in the Upper Clark Fork, and I'll throw the Blackfoot in with the Upper Clark Fork because they're actually very similar. And there's a number of ways to characterize flows in rivers, and I've chosen one. And if I had to characterize it simply, we're in the Upper Clark Fork and the Blackfoot, we're about 1/3 of the average flow for this time of year. And things are still shaking out as we're on the tail end of snowmelt, but we've recently had some warm days and flows didn't bump up and temperatures didn't decrease, which suggests to me that we're nearing the end of snowmelt in those two basins. So like I said, 1/3 of average. So another way to put that is it's almost like it's mid-July in an average year. So what that means to us as far as the prognosis is our warmest times in rivers in an average year is roughly the third week in July to the third week in August. So if it's like mid-July now, then we're going to be possibly talking about hoot owl restrictions in the coming weeks. And so it's a bit alarming. It's early, and so just be aware of that. It's for the Bitterroot River. I'll just throw that in real quick. It's better in the Bitterroot, but it's still below average. I would say we're about 2/3 of average in the Bitterroot, and it's more like it's in a normal or average water year. It's more like late June, early July for the Bitterroot. And like Adam said, we do have tools at our exposure that we can use other than just hoot owl restrictions. and that includes the water management. In the Bitterroot, we have storage water in Painted Rocks Reservoir in Lake Como that we own, and we can release that as needed for fishery health. And we set up a water management plan for the year in the latter part of June. And then we do have water rights in the Blackfoot and the Clark Fork as well that we'll be watching and possibly be using. I did want to mention that we have several criteria in Region 2, the western part of the state. For rainbow trout and brown trout, it's 73 degrees for 3 consecutive days. For cutthroat, it's 66 degrees for 3 consecutive days. And for bull trout, it's 60 degrees. And then on top of that, we work with the Blackfoot Challenge, and they have a local drought plan, and their criteria is 71 for 3 consecutive days. So it's a hodgepodge there, a little confusing, but I just want you to be aware that there are different criteria for different fisheries and places. And those places are further outlined in our statewide management plan on how those apply. So that's a good reference. I'll stop there, Adam, unless you had anything else you wanted me to talk about.
No, that's great. And that'll segue nicely into Mike Duncan's discussion for Mike's the Bozeman area fish manager in FWP Region 3, and that'll be a great segue to Mike.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks, Pat. Yeah, I'll piggyback on much of what Pat shared with Region 2, and it'll probably be a common theme throughout the day. Unfortunately, I thought we would have a much better outlook than a lot of the western half of the state here in southwest Montana, especially in the western part and the Gallatin Yellowstone drainages, but spring dried up and we had some unseasonably warm temperatures starting in May that had put us more in a similar position to what folks are seeing over around Missoula and then up north with what Jason's going to share. So a similar outlook around here. I wanted to focus the initial discussion a little bit on the Blackfoot, since that's drawn, the big hole, since that's drawn quite a bit of attention the last couple of years. And we're in a similar boat. There's certain stretches that are approaching or below historic lows in the big hole with some of the gauges that have only been operational for about 15 years. But the lower stretches down towards Twin Bridges are lower than anything we've seen since 2008, since that gauge was operational. But upstream of there, we're well below the 25th percentile of what we typically see this time of year, with water temperatures up around Wisdom starting to creep up into the 70s, where, as Pat mentioned, we'd start to see hoot owl restrictions start to come in play much earlier than we'd expect on a normal year. Similar to what Pat and staff over on the Blackfoot have to work with, there's a drought plan on the Big Hole, as Adam mentioned earlier, that is developed by the Big Hole Watershed Committee, which is a group of folks in the community over there that have worked with our staff and the DNRC to help develop flow criteria that would trigger a couple different actions. The first of which is a phone tree with water users and commercial anglers and other stakeholders in the area to just make folks aware that flows conditions aren't looking favorable for the Big Hole, and to start initiating voluntary conservation efforts as far as water use goes. And then that starts to step up as flows approach the flow criteria that the Watershed Committee has developed that would ultimately trigger angling closures. So that's a tool specific to the Big Hole that's gained widespread support in the community over there with the water users and many of our other partners over there that we can use on the big hole, whereas we rely on more general criteria for flow on other rivers in southwestern Montana and across the state for flow-based criteria. So just wanted to provide an example of where things stand over on the big hole. Our staff initiated with the DNRC and Big Hole Watershed Committee that first threshold in early May to try to make folks aware and work on conservation efforts. And then as things continue to drop with spring runoff coming to a quick end, we'll continue to work with water users on where we can find conservation measures to keep as much water as we can in the river. But the big hole is fairly indicative of what we're seeing across Region 3. Even the Gallatin, Yellowstone, lower parts of the Madison drainages, which were sitting above median average snowpack earlier this winter, we're seeing flows that are relatively low for this time of year. And I've started to kind of reference 2021 as being the most recent exceptionally bad year, kind of as a frame of reference for folks. And most of our sections are below the flows we saw just a couple of years ago in 2021, which is probably fresh in folks' minds. So, you know, we can probably expect, unless things change, we're supposed to get some rain and some cooler temperatures over the next couple of days. So hopefully that'll buy us some time. But it's shaping up to be probably a similar year to 2021. Based on what we've got to work with right now. I guess with that, maybe we can head up north to Jason's country.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So Jason Mullen is the Region 4 Fisheries Manager based out of Great Falls, and take it away, Jason.
Yeah, thank you. Region 4 is, in a pretty similar shape to what we just heard in Region 2 and Region 3. I'm going to take a little bit different approach and focus on the Rocky Mountain front, where we're seeing some of our worst conditions. Looking at the U.S. Drought Monitor, Rocky Mountain front's already in severe drought conditions, whereas the rest of Region 4 is kind of in moderate drought or abnormally dry conditions. So few streams and reservoirs along that area, just kind of as indicators of the general conditions along the Rocky Mountain front. Starting in the south on the Dearborn River, normally a really popular float this time of year when flows are normally high. Currently, we're at 63 CFS. That's the lowest on record, 55 years of data. Lower than the prior low was in 2000, which is kind of a memorable drought year for some people. And we're more than half below what we saw in 2000. So really poor conditions there on the Dearborn. Sun River is in a similar situation. Sun River has a very heavy irrigation demand. The Sun River at Sims, as of yesterday, was about 107 CFS. The median flow, kind of the normal flow for this time of year, is about 1,400 CFS. So very low flows there. Starting up, looking at the reservoirs at the head of the drainage, Gibson Reservoir is about 71% full. It didn't fill, and it was about 17 feet from full when it was at its max. It's already being drawn down. You may have seen an article that came out last week. It was this is the second year in a row that Gibson Reservoir didn't fill. And that's the first time, or the second time that that's happened on record. The last time was in the 1940s. And then Willow Creek Reservoir, another reservoir within that system, very popular rainbow trout fishery. That's 65% full and decreasing now. It's about at its max, it was about 8 feet from full. And it's expected to be drawn down to similar levels to what it was last year, which is lower than normal. But that's going to be several weeks earlier than normal, so probably by mid-July. And then moving north to the Marias River, The Marias has been in a period of drought for several years now. Current flow is about 412 CFS below Tiber Dam. Normal flow again this time of year is about 1100 CFS. And releases have been between 4 and 500 CFS for since October 2022. So this is the third consecutive year of not having any really spring runoff, just because of the significance of the drought in that basin. Tiber Reservoir is 82% full. It's not expected to fill. It's expected to be about 9 feet below full pool at its highest, and probably will start dropping soon. So in general, rivers and reservoirs along the Rocky Mountain front are in really poor condition. This is obviously not good for the fisheries. It's not good for trout recruitment in the rivers that we hear a lot about, but also in the reservoirs that we don't talk about as much. It's it's not good for recruitment of our juvenile fish in the reservoirs either. Do want to note, most of these boat ramps kind of at these reservoirs are accessible now, but you should probably expect that as we go through the summer, many of the reservoirs, the boat ramps will no longer be accessible. I guess real briefly, kind of in the rest of the region, Smith River and Belt Creek, kind of in the Little Belts, that was our example of where we were doing really well. We had really good snowpack, really good spring flows. And just in the last week or so, they've really dropped where we're now below those median normal levels in both the Smith and Belt Creek. And then lastly, on the Missouri River below Holter, we really had no significant runoff flow below Holter. I think at its max, it was about 5,700 CFS or 5,900 CFS. Normal max is about 14,000 CFS. And the releases from Canyon Ferry have been dropped as of, I believe, last Friday to 4,100 CFS. So that's kind of our minimum recommended level that we like to see in the river. Based on Bureau of Reclamation's June operating plan, the most likely scenario is that Canyon Ferry will still fill and be able to maintain that 4,100 CFS level. But under the worst case scenario or the worst plan, flows could drop below that too. I think that's probably it on my end.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason. And most importantly, I'm launching on the Smith on Friday, so you have to guarantee that, not only good fishing, but an adequate amount of flow. So, anyway, well, I guess with that, it's been really great to just getting a chance to daylight FWP's approach to kind of monitoring and managing drought impacts to some of the amazing fisheries that we all care so much about. I want to thank the FWP staff involved here and others on the drought work group for their efforts to protect our fisheries while keeping everyone informed of where and when they can fish in Montana during it's kind of becoming a now all too routine drought period. And lastly, I want to thank the anglers, the landowners, our partners for, collectively doing all we can to once again meet our mission to steward the fish, wildlife, parks, and outdoor recreational resources for the public now and into the future. It's really important. And with that, I'll turn it over to Greg, who's going to moderate any questions. And I think Garrett also has some social media stuff too. So
Great. Thanks, Adam. Thanks, gentlemen. So yeah, if you have a question, raise your hand and we'll start kind of building a queue of questions, and we'll get you. I'll activate your mic so you can ask those in the order we got them, and then if we've also got a few questions that on Garrett's desk that we got from our social media feeds as well. So start with Dan Vermillion. Dan, I'm going to let you. There you go. Unmute yourself and ask a question.
All right. Oh, sorry. Okay, now you can hear me, I hope.
Yep.
Okay, this is a question for Mike Duncan. We spend most of our time on the Yellowstone Boulder and on the Bighorn. You don't spend a lot of time. I imagine I know your region doesn't extend to the Bighorn, but I guess I'm wondering what you're seeing or what you're hearing from the park as far as this summer goes, and whether if we're going to go back to 2008, where they actually closed the entire park to fishing before we did at the commission and put our hoot owl in. I think that year we probably did it like July 8th or 7th, but I'm just wondering what you're seeing and how you sort of envision, based on the long-term forecasts, the next 4 weeks playing out in the Yellowstone drainage as it relates to fishing.
So I think it would be better to reach out to the park, Todd Cool and some of his colleagues in Yellowstone to get their thoughts. We do coordinate with them regularly. I've been in touch with Todd, especially on the west side of the park, where we have a little bit more geothermal input over there on the Gibbon Firehole in Madison, and are taking a much more concerted effort this year with coordinating on some restrictions and closures, especially where the Madison weaves its way in and out of the park, to make things easier for enforcement and anglers to know what's open and what's not. So I don't want to speak to where the park is, but the upper Madison is in pretty rough shape right now as far as water goes. We've been in touch quite a bit with Northwestern Energy on flows into Hebgen. They're at I think about a third, kind of similar boat to what Pat mentioned earlier with flows into Hebgen and approaching historical lows there. The Madison's sitting at 392 CFS coming out of the park. 360 was the all-time low in 1931. And just for reference, 2021, it was 446. Typically this time of year, it's closer to 850. So they're struggling to fill Hebgen. So we've been coordinating a lot on that. I know the park is concerned with water temperatures over in that part of the park. The Yellowstone is faring much better as far as water temperatures and flows, and that's typical, as you're well aware, Dan. So I think it's a little early to, I think, speculate on the Yellowstone in or out of the park or where things are going to go. But we're creeping up towards hoot owl criteria outside of the park on the Madison. I mean, the Madison between Hebgen and the park hit 75 on Sunday. Luckily, we got some cloud cover yesterday and things dropped back down into the 60s, but the upper Madison's getting pretty warm above Hebgen. So it wouldn't surprise me if, like Pat said, in the next couple of weeks, we start considering hoot owl criteria for that part of the world, but I still think we're a ways out for the Yellowstone.
All right. Craig Eggers, can unmute yourself and ask your question. Are you there, Craig? Can you hear us? Shoot, we're can't hear you. I'll send you back and raise your hand again if you got your audio figured out. Okay, moving along. Amanda Eggert.
Hi, I was just wondering when we can expect some reports on some of the fisheries that have been struggling a little bit. So, like population monitoring data for the Clark Fork and the Big Hole and the Gallatin and some of those other rivers.
I think it seems appropriate. Mr. Saffel and then Mr. Duncan might have some internal information about that.
Yeah, so yeah, I heard the Clark Fork. That's me. Um, so we did surveys this spring. I guess I think your question was, when do we expect updates? We can provide that update upon request. I don't have that off the top of my head, but yeah, more than willing to share that however you'd like, probably in another venue.
Yeah, that would be great. But if there's anything that kind of comes top to mind from looking at, any trends that you're seeing, anything that is worth highlighting.
Right, right, okay. So the Clark Fork's a big river, but I think the most upper end of the Clark Fork, near Warm Springs, we've had a decline in brown trout numbers, a dramatic decline. So that's just above Deer Lodge. We're not relating that really to flows, and we want to do some research to figure out what's going on there. The Clark Fork uh, below that area seem to be pretty stable as of this spring. Once you get below Missoula, we saw some declines in cutthroat trout. We're not quite sure what the cause of that is yet, and then we have some other sampling we want to do to see if they've declined elsewhere as well to kind of corroborate that finding. So that's kind of new and yet to be determined and assessed, I guess. And then further downstream, yeah, it's fairly stable. So I think that sums up the Clark Fork.
Thanks for that. Mike?
Yeah, just real quick. If you want more information, more specific things, I can provide it another time.
Okay. Yeah, that would be great.
Mike.
Yeah, Amanda, I'll have to track it down for you, but we did put out a press release, I think about a month ago, that provided a table with abundances for most of our long-term sections in the Big Hole, Beaverhead, and Ruby. So those data should be available in a press release, which should be posted on our website. If you have trouble tracking it down, I can forward that to you too. But it's an interesting mix of results from our spring sampling in those rivers as well. The upper section on the Big Hole is up by Jerry Creek, and things were promising up there this spring, and then the news got worse as you move downstream to where we really struggle with flows. And so we saw stable to slightly higher numbers this year in the Big Hole up high, and slight decreases as you move downstream. The one highlight of the spring was the upper Beaverhead below the dam up at Clark Canyon. That tailwater right below the dam has fared fairly well, especially relative to most of the other sections in Southwest Montana the last couple of years. But even downstream, numbers rebounded really well. And so our staff over there, Matt Yeager, the biologist on the Beaverhead and Ruby, has done a really good job working with dam operators and users over there, especially with winter flows, to get as much as we can in the winter when they start to dial things back to start storing water for the following year. So the Beaverhead has been a good ray of sunshine this year. Unfortunately, the Ruby is still near historic lows as far as brown trout abundances go over there. So still struggling to get that to rebound. We also produce an annual report for Northwestern on the Madison, and that can be found online. If you Google 2188 report for Northwestern, they post our reports on their webpage each year, and that provides data from the Madison River. So we've got two sections in the upper Madison, which again have been doing fairly well and pretty consistent over the last few decades. But the lower Madison, below Ennis Reservoir, where you think of all the tubing and recreational floating down there, has been struggling about the last 10 years or so. It's leveled off a little bit, but still well below the long-term average. So that's one of the other areas that's drawn a lot of attention lately. But you can find that report fairly easily online. But if you, again, are having trouble finding it, I'm happy to share it with you. So those are kind of the pretty consistent reporting we do. But again, similar to Pat, and I'm sure Jason and every other manager, we have those data and can share them if you have questions about the Jeff or Gallatin or Yellowstone, other areas.
Great, thank you for that.
Yep.
Hey, Adam, I just wanted to add that, you know, we have, like, I mentioned the current population status of just kind of this spring or last year. And it's sometimes when there's really low flows, we can see an immediate impact to the fishery because there's just not as much space for the fish. But other times, what it affects is how well the young fish survive into the population. So sometimes we won't see effects of drought for like 2 or 3 years when those fish are susceptible to our sampling, and we can pick up how well those young fish did. So just keeping that in mind.
Great point. Thank you.
Okay. Next up, we have Blair Miller.
All right, hi guys, it's Blair Miller with Lee Newspapers. I'm just kind of wondering, you know, as we're doing this pretty early here in the summer, obviously fishing and is a good domestic draw, but also a tourist draw. I'm wondering how you guys are kind of considering the messaging when we're this early, of not wanting to necessarily freak people out for the whole summer, but also be sort of safe from a biological standpoint.
Adam, you want to take this one?
Perfect. Yeah, thanks, Blair. I think that's a really important component to everything we do. We don't really approach this topic any differently from a Montana angler versus a non-resident angler. And so the important piece here, and that's why we double down on involving our ComEd division in our work group process on a weekly basis, is so that we can hit that mark when and where we need to run press releases, how active we engage our website and maintain everything that is pertinent to right now, so that when a person begins looking at their calendar and they're flying in from New England and they're going to go on the Madison, they have, hey, I leave on Friday. When I touch down in Bozeman, where can I and can I not go? That's an important piece of this entire thing. And if we didn't have our entire team working all those different angles, it wouldn't be possible for us to get the most clear message to any angler who's coming to Montana, whether it's you and I who live here or anybody across the country. So yeah, we take that into consideration. And really, more pointedly, we try to preempt a lot of this with some outreach up front, saying, hey, and we've done that this year already. We've reached out and said, hey, it's drought season, be prepared. You guys know the drill. Hoot owls and closures are coming. And we're doing everything we can through that lens, especially in these really, really extreme drought years. Like, you know, I'm not trying to be too rosy here. It's going to be a rough one this summer. So,
Adam, can I add a little bit to that?
you bet.
So some of the messaging with that, Blair, that when I have individuals reach out, whether it's an outfitter who's only got specific days on a certain water body, that's a tough workaround, right? They might only have days on the big hole or somewhere else, or can't go use the forest. But generally speaking, most folks either coming to visit or who live here, there are opportunities to fish even on the worst of years if you head uphill into the mountains, whether that's a small mountain stream or a mountain lake. And even our town ponds that we manage more as a put and take fishery through pretty consistent stocking, that even though, you know, some of these big rivers that people are coming to visit, and we recognize that, and they want to fish these, there are opportunities out there that are world-renowned fisheries that are going to be open even in the worst of years without the biological concerns with high water temperatures. Flows might be low, but generally it's still going to be pretty cold up in the mountains. So there's almost always opportunities nearby for people to get out and fish, even if those main stem sections might have restrictions or closures in place.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
I'll just add that it's a restriction. You can still fish from 6 till 2 p.m. and that might be when you want to be out there anyways. It's a little cooler.
All right, next up, Matt Elsasser.
Thank you. Just in the face of unprecedented trout population declines in the basin, identified by science on nutrient and dissolved oxygen pollution, and just with irrigation flows often 10 to 20 degrees warmer than the rivers, are you working with DEQ on pollution or DNRC on irrigation efficiency and enforcement as you look at biological impacts to the trout?
Thanks. Adam, you want to handle that one?
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, it's a great question, Matt. In fact, I've been staying in communicado with Lindsay Kay over at DEQ, and we've been talking about all the issues as they relate to other aspects of potential impacts to our fisheries, and working through processes to keep those other aspects in play when we're discussing not only this subject, but anything that may impact our fisheries. And so, yeah, we're working with both DEQ and DNRC whenever possible to at least stay in communication about some issues, especially in severe drought seasons like this one.
Great. Okay. DJ Bauer. DJ, you're up. See you unmuted, but we can't hear
Hear me now?
There you are.
Perfect. I guess this is mostly a question for Mike, though I guess anybody can kind of chime in since there's drought conditions everywhere. But just since you mentioned the big hole in particular, you talked about some of those, in addition to hoot owl, some of the volunteer conservation efforts that people may have to undergo this summer. What do you expect some of those to look like, whether it's, just fishing / angling less or less recreation, things like that? What in particular would you be looking at? And then also, how do you think those kind of volunteer efforts would compare to years prior, whether they would be more extensive or something like that?
Sure. So we've got several staff in the Big Hole, primarily involved with grayling conservation, who work with the DNRC, NRCS staff, and Big Hole Watershed Committee and other users, that when we're approaching some of those criteria outlined in the drought management plan, I don't want to get too far down the weeds, but I can share those with you, DJ, so you have the actual numbers in plan in front of you at some point if you need them. But our staff are out there daily looking at flows and working the phone tree in the Big Hole to see where conservation of water might occur. And so that might be someone who can use a different source of water to provide a couple CFS and a reach we're concerned about. Work with, maybe they can hay a little earlier and cut things off and start cutting a little earlier. And just work with them to buy us, in the upper part of the river, a couple CFS goes a long way where we have grayling. And then we have staff and partners like Trout Unlimited who are working with water users and have a couple big projects as well as some smaller tributaries coming down the pipeline with reworking the plumbing on how folks irrigate their property. And so traditionally, a lot of those folks have used cold water from tributaries, whether it's the Wise River or some streams around Wisdom, where we can work with them on pumping hot water from the Big Hole and leave that cold water in the tributaries. And one that not only improves water temperatures in the main stem, it also keeps those tributaries wet, which is important rearing habitat for juvenile fish that ultimately make their way out to the main stem. So we have projects like that that we've got coming down the pipeline in the next couple of years, where we're actively working to improve conditions on the ground for long-term projects like that. So we're hitting it from every angle that we can, and just making small improvements with opportunities that pop up.
Thanks, Mike. Okay. Josh Bergen.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're a little quiet.
Oh, yeah, stupid computer. I'll lean into it. Another question on the big hole. My son and I floated there in April, happened to notice that there's a new golf course going in, and they were running full sprinklers in April, which is earlier than the typical irrigation season. So I'm just wondering if there's any concerns about this new golf course on the lower big hole at a place that's seeing low flows already, especially being that they're irrigating so early in the year, and if it's being monitored and if there's anything that can be done to mitigate impacts.
So the monitoring would be a question for the DNRC. They're responsible for enforcing any water rights. I do know they went through the appropriate channels when they acquired that property and constructed the golf course, that they have the water rights they need to irrigate when they need for that. So they're legally using their water. And like anyone else, we'll work with them on ways they can be most efficient. Similarly to what we do over in Three Forks with the golf course over there, and some of their practices, both with water, nutrients, and that kind of thing. We'll work with anyone who's willing. So it's a legal water use, and we try to work within the sideboards that we have with the law and DNRC. And do what we can.
Thanks.
Yep.
Okay, Tristan Scott.
Hey all, thanks a lot for taking the time to address concerns that may impact fisheries and recreation angling opportunities so proactively, especially since it seems like some degree of restrictions are likely this summer. I really appreciate all the valuable expertise represented on this call, except I haven't heard anything from Region 1, which is where I'm at. Can you give us a sense of what's happening in the Flathead? Last fall, the Fish and Wildlife Commission adopted new angling regulations aimed at conserving native trout populations in some sections of the Flathead. And given what we're gearing up for, I'm wondering whether there's any new information about the health of those fisheries, specifically West Slope cutthroat and bull trout fisheries in the South Fork. Is there anybody on the horn today that's prepared to talk about Region 1?
Hey, Tristan. Thanks for the question. So I did get a chance in preparation for this meeting to really talk to Mike Hensler, the fish manager up in Region 1. And, the one thing that we really wanted to highlight for folks about Region 1 was the unprecedented hoot owl closure that occurred on the North Fork. And keeping with the spirit of, the connections to drought, specifically for this call, that's something that we have on our radar, and all things right now are leading right towards that same scenario, where we're potentially looking at putting in restrictions on the North Fork, which, when you think about the broader landscape of places in Montana that thermally at least could withstand most situations in perpetuity, now that we're starting to see impacts to fisheries where water temps are at 70 plus degrees in areas like that, we're keeping a very close eye on things throughout the state. And I do apologize for not having more staff available today. The intent of this meeting was to kind of highlight and daylight our process through the drought work group, and just kind of really talk about a few of the top concerns. And so we wanted to keep this group pretty small and pointed. I'm more than happy to, after this call, sit down with you and the Region 1 fish manager and discuss your concerns. So please reach out and we'll get in touch and sit down and chat through all your questions with the Region 1 fish manager. Thank you.
All right, let's Garrett, I think you've got a couple of questions from our social media feed.
Yeah. What is being done to assess pressure on tailwaters?
Oh, great question. Thanks for that, Garrett. So angling pressure has been a mainstay topic with the fisheries division dating back to the 1980s. Every other year, we do angling pressure surveys where we quantify the number of angler days on particular water body stretches throughout an entire license year. And so our license year falls between March 1 all the way back around to February, the end of February. We send out, this is actually kind of a good update. Over the past couple of years, we've really changed our strategy for how we've targeted anglers to participate in this pressure survey. And I think it's really a nod to our staff to bring it into a contemporary space. Historically, we've done a mail out survey where you received a postcard, you find your water body, list the number of days fished, and you mail that back to us. Obviously, it's the 21st century, so we've moved a lot of that to where we're in the final year of comparing that traditional survey versus a new online resource. And so it's really important for us to evaluate how we've done things, see if we can make it better, and actually still make that program a priority. With that said, we still keep a handle on the typical range of 3 to 4 million angler days across the state of Montana, and we do that every other year, mostly on odd years.
Great. Thanks, Adam. Okay, Ray Stout, you've got your hand raised.
Hello. Yeah. Do you have anything about the Kootenai River? Of course, we have the Lake Koocanusa-Libby Dam over here.
Adam,
Thanks, Ray. Unfortunately, today I don't have the specific information related to that particular water body. But again, like with the other caller, Ray, if you could get us your contact information, I'm more than happy to sit down or facilitate a conversation between you and Mike Hensler, the Region 1 fish manager, to get you that valuable information. I suspect we're going to hear very similar trends across the state. Drought is impacting not only the areas we discussed today, but the entire state of Montana. So I suspect it's going to be very similar in nature.
All right, so we've got some hands up of folks that have already asked a question, so I'll bring you back on. And if you have, we just got a new one that hasn't spoken. Mike Geary, just in the nick of time.
You can hear me?
You might have to speak up just a little bit.
Yeah, can you hear me?
You're a little quiet.
Well, I'll yell.
Okay.
Well, I think this is a full-blown crisis that continues. I think drought implies it's a temporary condition. I've been an outfitter on the Smith for 40 years. I see increased drought every year. In fact, I can't really remember anymore a series of wet years. I think that happened in the 90s. At what point do you just kind of admit that water and water use and the way we've used it in Montana going forward is just not sustainable anymore?
Yeah, yeah, great question, Mike, and a pointed one, and I appreciate that. these are the difficult, challenging issues that we're faced with as resource managers now and into the future. And this conversation is probably one of the top priorities from a fish division standpoint and a water resources standpoint, for us to figure out a path forward that's the least impactful to our resources, particularly fisheries, but also to the recreationalists out there, that are hoping we can all collectively figure it out. I will say, the best strategy in the short term, I believe it was Mike or Jason mentioned, working with others across the state or across the street. From my perspective here at headquarters, working with DNRC, working with DEQ, and we routinely have these conversations about finding solutions. It's certainly on our radar. We recognize that it's a prolonged, now very normal approach to, sitting here today talking about the drought scenario. It's now a normal process that we go through, and we know it's coming. There's a lot of challenging conversations, I think, FWP is willing and prepared to have regarding this subject, and I thank you for continuing to bring it to our attention. You're not alone. We hear comments like yours consistently, and we appreciate you continuing to bring it to our agency. And I can tell you it's certainly a priority for us to continue to talk about.
Go ahead, Mike.
Well, I think you're I really kind of laud FWP, especially out in the field. I think you're constricted by what you can do, and I do think you do a pretty exemplary job. But when it comes to when we start talking about water, you also have the advantage of saying that's DNRC. So if you can project forward, tell me what life looks like after adjudication.
Mike, this is where I wish I had our water staff on this call, part of the work group. As it's a really difficult conversation. It's a priority of ours to figure out a solution to this ongoing problem of maintaining in-stream flow that is the least impactful to our fisheries resources. And we continue to have the conversations with our partners across the street, other agencies, and a lot of folks in the NGO world too. And I think that the notion that we're continuing to have those conversations to come up with solutions, because you're right when you say nothing's changing in the near term here unless we get back into a wet period. And I think that will likely be the exception, not the rule. So we'll continue to have those conversations and work on it for constituents like yourself.
All right, thanks. Okay, Paul Sidaway. Paul, have you unmute yourself?
How's that? Hear me?
Yep.
Oh, great. Thanks, guys. Thanks a lot for doing this. And I agree with Mike 100% that we remain in a crisis, and we all the agencies need to work together really for a solution. Mike and I were both on the 2015 state water plan for the Upper Missouri, which was a great learning experience. And one of the conclusions in 2015 that we came to, and it wasn't easy, was that both the Big Hole and Gallatin drainages were most likely in need of water storage projects for the future, both structural and non-structural. And here we are 10 years later, and really there has been no major movement. And it was really disappointing to see at the legislative level this year that a bill that had a tremendous amount of money allocated for water storage was defeated. And at what point, is Montana going to get on board and invest in some aggressive water storage facilities, both structural and non-structural? And until we improve water flows on especially the big hole, we're not gonna see the fishery improve, I'm sure. That's a pretty basic point. We know that. So, and I know that you guys have all done a great job, but we really got to get everybody together to get some. And this is not new news. This has been going on for some time, and maybe somebody has some information about why that bill was defeated. But we need to move forward and get something going.
Adam, you want to?
Yeah, thanks for that. I guess I'll call it mostly comment. I think I heard a question in there, Paul. Thank you for bringing that perspective. I really appreciate you highlighting your understanding of those issues. And what I would just say is, much like I said to Mike, is it's a priority of ours to put projects together to benefit the fisheries across the state, whether it's Ekalaka or Eureka, everywhere in between. And it sounds to me like you're highly involved in at least this process and interest in water projects. And again, probably not an answer you want to hear, but we remain engaged with our partners across the street at DNRC to have these conversations. And I can certainly, bring this topic up the chain and continue to have the conversations within our agency, because I completely agree. There's going to be some very challenging conversations coming our way. And there are solutions to certain things, although, where our agency plays a role in developing those solutions is one thing, but we just need to recognize, maintaining patience, keeping our eye on the prize, and knowing that it's still a priority to keep water and the amount necessary in drainages moving forward. And so I applaud you for continuing to push the message to think through this important issue. So thank you.
Thanks, Adam.
Matt, do you have your hand up? Do you have another question?
Oh, yeah, I didn't realize it stopped, but just with this situation, is there going to be consideration of a stronger hoot owl?
So could you clarify by stronger hoot owl? I'm just curious, Matt. Thanks for the question.
Oh, sure. I mean, I guess just for this, it was mentioned for the cutthroat, the lower temperature, but I mean, obviously for some of these species, they're going to do better even below, at 68 degrees or something. But as far as just lowering the threshold in areas that are in crisis.
Yeah. Okay.
Is there a tool or ability to do that?
Yeah. Well, so we've evaluated our threshold criteria a number of times over the years, and I realized that, probably as things persist, when you start to use 20 or 30-year periods to evaluate things, the bar's continually moving down. What I can tell you is right now, internally, where we stand with the criteria we've developed, that's the best available science. And we consistently, routinely hear from folks like yourself that say, hey, maybe the state should take a lower threshold into consideration. And for those native species, we really do lean heavily on that. But right now, we feel comfortable in most drainages with that 73 threshold for things like rainbow trout or species like rainbow trout and brown trout. and we're going to continue, at least in the short term, to use those thresholds. I would like to mention, and I think I mentioned a couple instances, there are other things that factor in, things like pressure, for example, and in areas we all know, like, water issues aside, probably one of the biggest issues our agency is going to be facing over the next decade plus is the increased amount of use on everything, whether it's anglers, recreators. That's going to be one of the most challenging things that we face as an agency moving forward, and this is one of those things. And so I think, again, leaning on the best available science is where we're at with hoot owl restrictions, and if needed in certain situations, we have the ability to put in restrictions or closures outside the bounds of our criteria. So, yeah.
All right. We're coming to the end. Dan, you've got another question?
Excuse me, this question from Mike. Back, I think it was in 2008, whenever the earliest I can remember doing hoot owls on the Yellowstone, I think it was in 2008, it might have been 2007, but one of the things we were looking at early in the season, early in potential hoot owl, was that we had met the threshold for the flows as far as flow levels coming out of the park, but because of the Yellowstone Lake and a lot of those cold water tributaries up in the park, our temperatures were staying really, in the low 60s, mid 60s. We weren't hitting that 23.1. And I just wondered how you guys, or how the commission, or how the department is looking at a situation where you still have consistently pretty low temperatures due to thermal refuge waters that are coming in, what have you, but have flow levels that are going to that would technically trip the hoot owl regulations on the Yellowstone.
Yeah, so this is a topic Pat and I and some others have talked a lot about, with the intentions and intended purposes between hoot owl restrictions, which are temperature based for the most part, versus closures, flow based closures. The temperature thresholds, as Adam mentioned, are scientifically based biological criteria that threaten and affect catch and release mortality at certain criteria for each species. Whereas the drought criteria, flow-based, it can limit movement of fish seeking refuge or movement for other reasons. A lot of that comes from long-term effects with recruitment. So you can think of temperatures as, that it certainly affects juvenile fish. But assuming that temperatures are at reasonable levels, where we see the drought effects is typically several years down the line, when those juvenile fish born that year, the year before, start to recruit to the fishery. And so it's a delayed effect, a lot of times independent of fishing. And so I won't speak for what others may propose or pursue, but as long as we can maintain flows that provide reasonable ability for a fish to move, seek refuge, and that kind of thing, and water temperatures, are still down in the 60s. I think we're comfortable with fishing in those conditions. It's the acute stress related to those higher water temperatures because of angling, when we want to enact those restrictions, or if flows get so low that it's leaving fish vulnerable to inability to move, avoid predators, disturbance, that kind of thing. But it is something that we've discussed. There's certain criteria and management plans, like the Jefferson and Big Hole. Otherwise, we look at that 5th percentile when things get really bad, or angler displacement, back in 2021 when we start considering when I think is actually the last time the Yellowstone hit hoot owl criteria. And then we started to look at, how that was going to affect fishing on the Madison and Missouri, with those being really the only two options east of the divide outside of the Bighorn, to where folks had to go fish. So that was a very long-winded answer that I'm not sure answered your question. So feel free to nudge me in the correct direction.
No, I think that's the right. I mean, that'd be the answer that I would look at. I mean, I think that temperatures are really clear, right? I mean, it's very concrete. It's super empirical, and you can see the impact on the fishery right away. The flow impacts when you have low temperatures. That's where it gets kind of tricky for somebody making the decision whether to put hoot owl into effect. And the Yellowstone in particular, especially up in Paradise Valley, makes that kind of tough. So when that day comes, which I fear it will be in the next couple of weeks, we'll be watching and trying to give our input.
Thanks. Yeah, and it's something we've talked about. And I don't want to speak for Pat and folks west of the divide, but they look at those confluences, and they've got restrictions in place and take a closer look at some of those important areas, especially for bull trout. So it's not something that's lost on us, and we do keep an eye on some of those important areas.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks,
All right,
Dan.
so we got one more question, and then we'll call it. Jake Stagnoli.
Hi there, how's it going?
Hey, Jake.
Thanks for the presentations. It's been great. The chat. One concern that we have, I work with Northwestern Energy. With all the federal cuts going on in the country, is there any concern with USGS gauges, snowtail sites, not being able to uphold a lot of the maintenance and stuff like that? Is there any concern on your guys' end for that?
Adam, you want to handle that one?
So thanks for the question, Jake. So I actually just spoke with Clint Mulfield with USGS here in the last week or so. And then through some other conversations, I've learned that USGS stream gauge sites are still a priority for funding. The snowtail sites, I'm less familiar with USGS funding for those particular sites. But what I can tell you is, at least from what I understand and what I know, current funding for stream gauge is at least the USGS priority sites, and the ones that partners like FWP have input in maintaining. Those are still proposed to be funded. So
great. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for joining on. At one point, I think we had over 50 people listening in. Who knows how many millions more were watching the live feed on our YouTube channel.
Viral.
So Garrett.
Yeah, who's the best fly fisherman in fisheries? That's what people really want to know.
Ooh.
No, I thought it was a great conversation. We appreciate your expertise, and no, it was great work.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you everybody for taking time out of your lunch. I guess now you can eat.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. Thanks for attending, and enjoy your summer. Hopefully it'll be not as hot as we are fearing and more rain than we want.
Yep.
Take care.